Hi, this is Gail Sokol. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the egg.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
So on today's show, I think we need to talk about probably the truly unsung hero to all baked goods, and that is the egg. Eggs are really a big subject. Big. They are an ingredient in almost every baked good. Not everyone, but most baked goods rely on eggs. They are one of the most important to a baker. They are not only nutritional, they're about 75 calories. They are nutritionally packed with great stuff, but they also are great at other things. So let's first talk about eggs as an emulsifying agent. So what does that mean? They basically can bring together water-based and fat-based ingredients so that they stay together, like an emulsion, like a suspension. And if you have ever made a vinaigrette with oil and vinegar, you will notice that if you whisk oil and vinegar together, they will naturally separate. Like goes with like. So water-based ingredients will stay with water-based, and in this case, vinegar is water-based, and fat-based ingredients stay with fat-based ingredients so that the oil will actually rise to the surface. So eggs have a natural emulsifying in them, and that is in the yolk. It's called lecithin, and it's just this natural, beautiful emulsifying agent. Chefs use it to thicken soups and stews, but we're talking about it from a baking perspective. So eggs, I consider superpowers. They can hold air. They can't fly, but they can hold air, and they can actually leaven baked goods. They can even create a foam, and that foam is the thing that holds the air. Egg whites can actually expand, listen to this, 6 or 8 times their original volume when air is beaten into them. That is pretty darn cool. And they can hold up your angel food cake. They can hold up your sponge cake so it doesn't deflate, as long as you keep the air inside that egg. So that is really a cool thing. And this is without any type of other leavening agent like baking powder or baking soda. So I love that. So let's look at an egg. Let's actually take an up-close look at the egg. The outside of an egg, which is the shell, right? We all know it's the shell, because eggs are so cool. They sort of come in their own little package. They're fragile, but they do come in their own little package all together as one. And that shell is made up of calcium carbonate. It protects the egg, and it's also porous. So as a baker, if you don't want your brownies or your chocolate cake to taste like Limburger cheese or garlic, don't store your eggs next to the garlic or the Limburger cheese. Make sure you keep your eggs in their original container that they came in, and don't move them around too much. You want to keep them in the coldest section of your refrigerator, and you want to make sure that you keep them away from smelly foods. Odors can actually pass through the shell. So this calcium carbonate shell are tiny little pores, tiny millions of tiny little pores that can actually allow gases in, so smells can come in, and it also allows moisture to escape. So as an egg ages, it loses water content through that shell, even if it's not even cracked open. So it can dry out a little bit. There's even an air cell at the top of an egg. So if you've ever seen, sometimes you can actually see how they test eggs and how fresh they are. You can actually see they put a special light behind them, and you can see the size of the air cell, this little space of air above the yolk inside the egg. As the egg ages, more air enters it through that calcium carbonate and those pores. So the older an egg, the more air gets inside that egg, and then that egg starts deteriorating. So let's take a closer look. Let's look at the anatomy, the inside anatomy of the egg. All right. This is really sort of cool. I love when I teach my students about eggs and how important they are. They sort of, they look at it in amazement. It's something that you crack, you may have for breakfast every day, but you don't even think about it. You don't think twice. You take eggs for granted. Don't take eggs for granted anymore. They're very, very important to us. So if you look at the inside anatomy of the egg, we all know eggs have a yolk and a white. The yolk contains the fat of the egg, and again, it has that natural emulsifying agent, which is called lecithin. There's also two white rope-like structures on either side of the yolk. Have you ever noticed those? Some people are like, ew, what's that? But they're known as the chalaza. And the two rope-like structures together are known as the chalazae. And what they do is they actually anchor that yolk. So if the egg did get fertilized and there was going to be a baby chick, that egg yolk would stay centered so that baby chick would grow very, very nicely in the center. The yolk contains the cholesterol. So if people are watching their cholesterol, they usually want to have just whites. And you'll see people have an egg white omelet because of it. Angel food cake is known as a very light, spongy cake, and it has no yolks at all. That's why it's pure white. And it has no fat whatsoever. It does have a lot of egg whites in it and a lot of sugar, but no yolks at all. So the albumin, which is the egg white, is pure protein. So if you're looking to bulk up and you want an egg white omelet, some people will have 3 or 4 egg whites just in one omelet alone, because that's only half the egg. So all poultry produce eggs. And what I mean by poultry, I mean anything from a chicken, a turkey, an ostrich, an emu, and those are pretty big eggs. You could probably feed 4 to 6 people with one of those eggs as an omelet. But as bakers, we tend to exclusively use eggs from a chicken. And in a baking recipe, unless it states otherwise, you should always use size large. And that's really the size you see in the grocery store, although you can buy extra large. Very often, I never see medium, small, extra small, or peewee. Yes, peewee is a size of chicken eggs. Would you believe it? You really wouldn't use them in a baking recipe. It really wouldn't be efficient. So again, if a recipe says 2 eggs, you want to make sure that you assume, and here it's okay to assume, that it is size large. In my new cookbook, Baking with Success, I always say size large, just to make sure and emphasize that fact, that so people do know when they're baking with my recipes, it's always large. So in a baking recipe, a large egg, on average, remember, on average, it depends on the hen, and it depends on many different things, how the hen was feeling that day. It usually weighs one egg about 1 3/4 ounces, sometimes up to 2 ounces, but usually about 1 3/4 ounces. And that's about 3 tablespoons in volume, if that gives you an idea. So once you buy eggs, usually buy them in the dozen, you can buy them a dozen and a half. And when I used to work in restaurants, we bought them by the case. And you get a lot of eggs for the case, but you also go through them a lot faster. They should stay fresh. If you're just a typical home baker and you buy a dozen eggs, they should stay 4 to 5 weeks, even after that date that's on the side of the container, as long as they are not cracked or broken. Now, if you ever see me in the grocery store, I'm the one that opens up the egg carton before I purchase them, and I check every single egg. I don't want to see a crack or any type of a shell that's broken. If you see that, don't buy it. And if you see enough of them, tell somebody from the grocery store, see the manager, because those eggs really are not safe to sell because bacteria could have entered that shell. So you really want to make sure that you don't use anything that is broken because you just don't know what got into it. You always want to keep eggs in their original container in the refrigerator. Now, it's funny. Here's a fun fact. In Europe, their eggs, because we always worry about salmonella with eggs in America, in Europe, they don't refrigerate eggs. Isn't that wild? They don't refrigerate eggs because they're very smart. They actually inoculate their hens against salmonella before they lay their eggs, so they can keep their eggs at room temperature. I think that's incredible. I thought that was an interesting fact. Another important tip I can give you for eggs, sometimes you want to use the egg white, sometimes you only want to use the egg yolk in a specific recipe, and sometimes you want to use the whole thing. So that's easy. You just crack it, pour it into a container, and you will use it. One basic tip when you're using the entire egg, you never want to crack an egg, let's say, into a moving electric mixer. So you have an electric mixer, you have softened butter going with the paddle, and you have sugar going, and it's getting nice and fluffy, and it's wonderful and beautiful, and birds are singing, and everything is happy, happy. And then you decide to bring your egg, because you're going to add an egg, to the edge of the bowl. You crack it, and the shell goes in. Okay, what do you do now? Because the mixture is going around and around and around. Are you going to be able to pick that shell out? No. So do not crack it on the side of a moving bowl for an electric mixer. Or for that matter, any bowl, even if you're mixing by hand. Always pre-crack your eggs in some sort of a container that you can just pour into your mixing bowl with the remainder of your ingredients. Very often, a shell will inadvertently get into the mixture. You don't mean to do it, but it can happen very easily. So, and nobody's perfect. And sometimes, depending on how you crack it, you want to try to crack that egg in the center, and it will sometimes shatter, and you want to make sure that you catch that shell before it goes into what you're making. All right, separating eggs. Oh boy, this is another big subject. So sometimes we want just an egg white, and egg whites are a little tricky. So if you're making what's known as a meringue, or a sponge cake, you will use a meringue, and a meringue is just egg whites and sugar, but you've got to only have the egg white. If there is even a minuscule amount of yolk in that white, guess what? The white will not beat up. It will not whip and hold any air because egg whites hold air. That's what makes that glorious foam that we talked about before. And that's one of the wonderful things about eggs. So if you get any bit of fat-based ingredients or any type of yolk in that white, it will not foam up. It will not beat up. And that's something you have to be careful of. So I'm going to give you my best tips on how to separate an egg. So there are tools you can purchase to separate eggs, save your money. All right. A lot of people do buy them, and you crack an egg in and it separates the yolk from the white. Are they always 100% perfect? Probably not. My advice is use your hands. They are your best tool. So here you go. Here we go. We're going to separate one egg. Now it sounds silly, but I'm going to tell you to get 3 bowls. Yeah. The woman's crazy, right? 3 bowls for one egg. Yeah, just get 3 bowls, and I'll explain why. So you're going to have bowls, and you're going to put them in front of you, across from you, and they should be small bowls, and you want them right in front of you. So you're going to take your egg and gently crack it in the middle. You can use a butter knife to do that, or just on the side of the bowl. The first part of the egg that's going to sort of ooze out, if you will, is the white. So gently pull that half of the shell apart and gently let the white pour into that bowl, fall into that little bowl. And do it closely to the bottom of the bowl. Don't do it so high up that it's just going to sort of, plop down and spew all over. So gently, you're going to allow this white to fall into the middle bowl. Make sure it's the middle bowl. And angle the shell a little bit so that the yolk stays in one half of the shell. And only the white comes out. Don't break that yolk if you can help it. Gently move your hand so that the yolk falls from that half a shell into your hand, and gently sort of shimmy shake it with your fingers slightly widened apart, almost like you're almost like a duck, and you're trying to get like a webbed fingers. You're just trying to make like a little sieve with little spaces in between your fingers, and shimmy shake the remainder of that white off of the yolk. Once it's separated and that yolk is still intact, put the yolk in one of the empty bowls on the right or the left, because you have your white in the center bowl. So now you have successfully, congratulations, separated one egg perfectly into its component parts, the white and the yolk. Now we only have to do 55 more, which is what I had to do when I worked in a restaurant. We'd make chocolate mousse cakes and I'd have to separate maybe 55, 60 at a time. That was crazy. So if you got a little bit of yolk in one of the whites, that was a disaster. All right, I wanted to cry because I'd have to throw all those whites out or make a lot of omelets. I couldn't use them for baking at all. So this is what you do with a second egg. Let's do a second egg. We still have one bowl that has a white in it, one bowl that has a yolk in it, and one bowl is empty. So now we're going to take the empty bowl. The one with the white, we're going to designate the bowls of whites. And the one with the yolk, that's going to be the bowl of yolks. So keep them separate. Now you're going to take a second egg and you're going to crack it over the empty bowl. And you're going to do the same thing you did before. You're going to let that white ooze out very gently. And you're going to put that yolk into half, sort of slide it over and tilt that shell so the yolk stays in one half of your shell. All right. And then you're going to pour it into your hand and gently let your fingers slightly open up to allow the remainder of the white to sort of slither out and fall into that bowl. Now, with the yolk still in your hand, put the yolk in the yolk bowl. Okay, the yolk bowl, you know which one, the one that just has that one yolk in it. And now, the one with the white, pour that white into your white bowl or your whites bowl. And now you have two clean, fat-free whites that are in one bowl and two yolks in another bowl. And I always know how many eggs I've cracked because I look at the yolks. If I see two eyes staring at me, I've got two eggs in there because of the two yolks. Now, sometimes you may get double yolks. Then you better make sure you count your eggs before you crack them. That happens sometimes. You know what twins are, right? So basically, you want to continue to do this and use that middle bowl as a catch for one single white, and then you pour that white into the whites bowl. So you will constantly be building up whites and constantly be building up yolks, but ne'er the two will meet. You don't want them to interconnect or intersect, because if you get one little bit of yolk in with that white, you can't use it. Okay, so let's do a third egg. All right, we're living dangerously. Let's do a third egg, and guess what happens? The minute you crack it, the shell pierces the yolk. Oh my goodness. So now the white and a little bit of yolk is drizzling into that empty bowl. That bowl where you just poured that other white into the whites bowl. But you don't have to worry about it. Your two whites that are perfectly clean and fat-free are in another bowl. So all you need to discard is that one broken egg that you just didn't separate properly. That's okay. So I'd rather throw out one egg or use it for another purpose than throw out 3 eggs now and have to start over. So do you see my point? You're actually saying those 3 bowls are helping you separate your egg whites into one, egg yolks into another, and then that middle bowl is your catch-all just in case you screw up. Now what you're going to have to do if you want to go to a 4th egg, you have to wash that bowl out because now it has a little bit of white and yolk in it. So the minute a yolk breaks, you're going to have to wash your hands and start over with that middle bowl and clean it and perfectly dry it, because any type of fat will prevent your egg white from foaming. Trust me on this. I actually watched a group of baking students trying to make a sponge cake, and they must have whipped their egg whites. They had, I think, 18 egg whites that they had contaminated with a little bit of yolk in their electric mixing bowl, and it was on high speed, full speed, with the beater attachment, which is what you would use for a sponge cake and to try to make an egg foam. And it must have been going for 20 minutes before they said, "Chef Sokol, what's wrong?" And I immediately said, "Did you get any yolk into your whites?" And they said, a little bit. I said, "That's it. Throw it out and start again." So you don't want to do that. So follow my tips because they really will help you. It's something that happens all the time, and I call it insurance. Those 3 bowls really have saved my life. So let's say you've separated your eggs, whites and yolks. You've made what you wanted to out of them. And you have some extra whites. For whatever reason, you have some extra whites. Sometimes I'll make a custard and I'll have just the yolks. The recipe calls just for the yolks, so I have extra whites. What do you do with them? Should I dump them? No way, Jose. I like to save them. So I will put them into a clean, dry, airtight container, just the whites, clean whites without any yolk, and I will date them and label how many whites are in that container, cover it, and freeze them. Yeah, you can freeze egg whites, and you can freeze them for probably 4 to 5 months. And when you want to thaw them, just put them in the refrigerator. Don't microwave them like I did once. I microwaved them and I ended up with a nice egg white omelet unexpectedly when I really wanted to make a meringue and an egg foam. So let them thaw naturally in the refrigerator. Give yourself a day or two to bring them back to room temperature and thaw them. And if you have extra yolks, yolks are a little trickier. You can buy commercial yolks that are in a carton, so they're shell-free, and you can purchase those. They usually have something in them like sugar water with corn syrup, just to prevent the yolk from drying out. And you can try it yourself, but the yolks may lose quality, so I tend to not freeze those. If you want to keep them in your refrigerator for 3 days, maybe tops, you can do that. If you're thinking of making a custard later on in the week, that's fine. But I really know for a fact freezing whites is fabulous, and it really helps so you don't have to waste any more eggs when you want to make that sponge cake maybe 3 or 4 months later. So we've learned all about the egg today and what an incredibly large subject it is. And now you know how important that egg is. So go to Baking Radio if you have any questions and leave me a message. If you have an egg question, I would love to answer some of your questions on air. On next week's show, we'll be discussing egg foams.